today. I just want to, ooh, there we go. All right, let's try this again. Hi, I'm Sarah Sladek. I am the host of Trends Talk, and you have tuned in for an amazing episode today. I'm the CEO of XYZ University, and our firm has been studying next gen strategies and creating cultures of belonging for more than 20 years. We are talking trends and have been doing this Trends Talk series all year to bring notable leaders to the forefront and just talk about who and what is coming next, which is such a hot topic. And I am so excited to say Jenk Oz is in the house. If you don't know Jenk Oz, oh man, you are missing out. He is a superstar, and I've been following his career for a long time. Jenk is based in the UK, but he's currently in the United States. He's at the Forbes 30 Under 30 conference. Welcome to the show, Jenk. Woo!
Thank you very much for having me, and super excited. Let's get cooking. How exciting!
All right, let's do it. Okay, so if you haven't tuned into Trends Talk before, we go through 5 questions. So let's tune up. Round 1. Here we go. My first question for you is, what current stat or data point best summarizes the need for organizations to prioritize Gen Z?
I think, look, there's a couple of really basic ones we can start with. We're 33% of the population, we're 40% of consumers, and we have by far the majority of financial influence in the world. So that's like an easy one. And we have about $8 trillion worth of annual income, and that's set to kind of increase 4 times over, I think, over the next 4 or 5 years. We're going to surpass millennials by 2030 in terms of income as well. And then that obviously also relates back to our consuming. So we're the biggest consumers on the planet, with 40% of consumers. And you would be silly as an organization not to really want to embrace Gen Z. And also, to kind of keep going, actually, we're kind of also the future of employment. 85% of the jobs needed for 2030's economy haven't been created in scale yet. And a lot of the jobs that kind of are going to be taken up by Gen Z are also going to be kind of replaced by AI and stuff like that. So there's a huge need for understanding of Gen Z.
Yeah, absolutely. Mind-blowing stats, right? When you think about it. And your generation is pushing for change, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But since you are at the Forbes 30 Under 30, I'm just curious, what is the topic of your talk, or what is your role that you're playing there?
Yeah, so I recently was fortunate enough to win I was listed as one of the Forbes 30 Under 30 winners for Europe. In marketing and advertising, or media and marketing. I can't remember the exact name of the category, but it's along those realms. And I was also invited to speak about kind of how brands can better engage with Gen Z on the main stage. So I spoke yesterday. I think it went quite well. If you look at Forbes' Twitter, I'm kind of plastered all over that as the resident Brit. So yeah.
That's awesome. And maybe you want to just tell our audience a little bit about Thread Media, your company.
Yeah, sure. So Thread Media Thread is kind of 2 things. Thread originally started as a publishing website. So it's a 100% social change focused digital publishing website where we speak about social change with the hope that if we talk about the good things people are doing around the world, it will inspire other people to do similarly good things. And that's kind of how we kicked off. So we were a social change at heart company. And then after that, because I was 16, I'm 19 at the time and now, but I was 16 at the time. And I got a lot of kind of attention for being a young entrepreneur, and I did a lot of public speaking about young entrepreneurship, hopefully kind of trying to inspire kids to do similar things. And from that, I got a lot of attention from kind of CMOs or that type of role at brands who are really doing well with older people, but not well with younger people. And they were like, you get Gen Z, you kind of know what you're talking about, help us out. Mm-hmm. And this is all back in 2020, 2021. So I started doing a lot of consulting behind the scenes. And then I realized it was super profitable, and I thought we should be doing this full time. So then we launched Thread Media, which is the consulting side of the business. And we've been kind of consulting for about 2 years now, and we've just been named as the official, well, I don't know how official it is, but we're basically the go-to Gen Z branch for Ogilvy Consulting in New York, which is pretty exciting.
So amazing. So amazing. All right, folks, we're going to go to the next questions. As I mentioned, I have 5 questions for Jenk today, but if you have questions, put them in the chat. We are going to put him on the spot and have him answer your
Oh
question
wait,
as well. All right.
bring it
All
on.
right. So here we go. Round 2. In the next few years, how is Gen Z likely to influence change in the workplace? What are your predictions?
I mean, there's like super obvious one, which we've already seen happen, which is the kind of the flexible work hours, spaces, and days. So that's kind of happened. Basically everyone's hybrid nowadays, anyways. But I think there's a lot of less obvious ways, which I kind of want to kind of run through. There's this massive desire to be heard, as a kind of giving them opportunities to speak up and kind of provide the time and kind of provide the platform and the opportunity to really speak and be heard by the company on like a bigger level. These are all kind of related, and you'll see kind of a common theme here. But there's a higher frequency of communication and a higher quality of the content being communicated. So kind of short bursts as opposed to like a quarterly check-in is what we really want. And then also the quality of the content being communicated needs to kind of get better. I think that Gen Z really want a kind of broader exposure within the company. You kind of want to understand better, like we want to understand better how you're a small piece of a bigger puzzle. So, I mean, I think these kind of conversations need to include business strategy, kind of product innovation plans as a whole, and then also you can then get a better understanding of not just your own team, but a more holistic understanding of the company, which I think is super important. And it gives a better sense of company engagement, and then obviously it stops things like this kind of quiet quitting that we see happening. Less corporate structure around kind of like around advancement and like the environment around that, because like previously you'd have this kind of notion where you have 2 years in this role, 2 years in this role, and then kind of 3-5 years here, and then you move to this company, and then you kind of that I think that's really not kind of how Gen Z want to be anymore. We really want to kind of go between different teams and then different kind of maybe even different companies within like under a broad kind of a mother company, or holding company is probably a better way of saying it. And you kind of want to kind of bounce around and kind of understand everything a little bit better. So less of a formal structure around kind of advancing throughout your career.
Mhm.
And I think that kind of also brings into like there's a much less formality around hierarchy as well. And we're seeing this now that in older companies, you would be scared to talk to your boss's boss, but that's really not a thing that Gen Z really kind of agrees with or wants to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? They don't want to kind of make that a reality. They want to kind of bring that down almost.
Right.
Trying to think, there's other kind of, again, obvious ones like diversity, inclusivity, super important when you're hiring and training, and also like adopting technology at the same rate that Gen Z does, because every kind of young person adopts technology the quickest that you can adopt it, and it's going implemented straight into your home. So no Gen Z really wants to work at a company where their company isn't adopting technology at the rate they are, if that makes sense. So
exactly.
I realize I keep saying Gen Z. I haven't been in the States long enough to start saying Gen Z. I keep on like trying to correct myself, and then people say like, "You mean Z?" Yeah, I do. Yeah.
No, that's totally fine. You know, one of my favorite stats about Gen Z is that your generation creates and consumes more content than any other generation.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating.
Yeah.
The other stat that I find fascinating is that your brains have developed differently. So all these things that you're talking
That
about,
doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
yeah, all these things you're talking about, like that desire to be well informed, to constantly be learning, moving around, adapting, evolving, innovating, co-creating, all these things. And there's so many workplaces that aren't ready for that, right? You actually said, people moving around jobs a lot more frequently. And you said, kind of that ballpark 2 years. But I think a lot of times, the history has been that people went to a job and they stayed in that job till they retired. And then it's gotten a little shorter and a little shorter. But,
there's some kind of absurd statistic about like Gen Z having in the realm of like 17 different jobs across like 5 different careers or something, across like 4 different houses as well. So like we're like a pinball machine of life.
Yes.
Bing, bing, bing.
things becoming very mobile, very adaptable, right? And I think that's fascinating. As far as the creation and consumption of content, do you have any tips for our audience on what kind of content resonates with your generation?
This is like, I actually feel like a broken record because I feel like everyone says this, but I can't stress enough. It's just all about, well, two things: consistency and authenticity, which is akin to transparency. I realized that authenticity has kind of become a bit of like a buzzword. So like staying transparent, staying original, and most importantly, staying consistent is by far the most important things that you can do as a company when you're making content. Because if you abide by those things, everything kind of falls into place. You make good, funny content and it becomes popular. It also applies to all of your influencer marketing that you do. Anything to do with content, as long as it's consistent and transparent, is kind of going to be successful as a rule of thumb. And then, and that applies to most aspects of content.
Right. Fantastic. Let's go to round 3, shall we?
Amazing.
There we go.
Exciting. Ding, ding, ding.
All right. All right, round 3. Gen Zs are holding organizations accountable, expecting them to take a stance on certain values and topics. This is a tough question, Jenk, but I know you have an answer.
I might need to take a like a reread that, but yeah.
How can companies do this without creating controversy or division among workers and consumers? Oh my goodness, such a tough question. What's your answer?
I want to like split it into two. I think that there's corporate values and there's like trending issues. I think your corporate values, they are firstly not the same and they shouldn't be treated the same way. Corporate values, creating and kind of upholding them, that's part of like, that's something you do in your mission statement. Like that's one of the first things you do as a company is, especially if you're a company trying to solve an issue, then that issue is the core to your company. Like that is what the foundation is what the structure is, and it should be treated with the importance as such. So you really should be kind of upholding these values, not kind of every day as a part of your operating system, not really like a attack on or a kind of like a kind of seasonal add-on. And it also needs to be kind of upheld by an entire, and this is where companies actually get it wrong a lot, is it needs to be upheld throughout your employees, throughout your, especially your senior management, and it actually most importantly, like the shareholders and like the kind of the web of shareholders. That's super important, needs to be done, and that is for the corporate values. Then you have trending issues, which I think it's generally good to take a kind of thoughtful, just caring and supportive approach. I think that there's some, it's really hard to say because some issues are very divisive. Some issues are kind of everyone agrees on it. So it's hard to say which ones to take a stand on, which one not to. I wouldn't take a stand on everything. I think it's unnecessary. And then it also belittles the things that you still find important if you're kind of giving all your energy to everything. You can't really kind of join every protest that walks past your window. So that's, I think, one thing to say is don't join everything. And just always take the kind of thoughtful, caring, and supportive approach. And especially if you think that you're like, if like senior management or older people don't really understand the issue, and this is again a common theme, but like start in your own backyard. Like your younger employees will have a better understanding, and someone will probably be direct. If it's a big enough issue, people will be affected by the issue at your own company. So ask them about it, and then from there, you can kind of understand where your stance is as a company. But yeah.
Yeah, it is, and I think that piece of Gen Z holding companies accountable, that is new. I mean, millennials rallied for different things, but your generation is, taking to social media or protesting or speaking up or actually, I'm hearing more and more that, you're taking action as far as leaving organizations that don't align with values or make certain decisions. So it's real interesting to observe. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't think. No, don't think so.
Okay. No, that's fine. One organization I was just talking to, they said they had a protest breakout at their conference, and it was all Gen Zs, and they were like, "What are we supposed to do?"
Yeah, no, it's difficult for some companies to kind of really understand, but I think just start your own backyard is like a really easy way of doing it, and understand if what your employees think is generally going to be the stance that you should take.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a crazy comment to make.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Be a kind company.
just be like kind and like supportive. So
Yeah. All right. Next round. Question 4. All right. What are 3 steps organizations can take to effectively engage Gen Z, Gen Z, whatever you want to call them, your generation?
I'm going to say it again, because I think it's the 4th time now in this call. Start in your own backyard. Use your employees, your young employees, understand, and they're like the most organic and credible source that you can actually find. So get them, rally them, you kind of create like an internal, lots of companies that are now have like internal Gen Z councils. So just like a kind of focus group-esque type thing of the young people who work at their company. So, and they meet like every few weeks. It's not really like a complaint or like a bitching and moaning session, but it's much rather just like an opportunity to share kind of business updates between, and also like you can meet the people from the other teams and stuff and the other young people, and it creates a sense of environment and kind of community. So that's good. Start in your own backyard. I love that phrase. I'm going to keep saying it a bunch. And then I think on a greater perspective, and this kind of leads on from that, is just understanding like beliefs and behaviors, and that in itself then goes towards consumer trends. So I think that this is kind of going to be like, I'm going to take a couple steps back here, but firstly, the thing is Gen Z is not a monolith by any stretch of the imagination. But currently Gen Z, and this is not specifically Gen Z, this is specific to the age that we happen to be right now, so from 16 to about 28, there's 6 kind of huge life stages that you go through basically every 2 years, and a large factor changes. So when you're trying to engage Generation Z, it's important to think about which element of Gen Z they're in. So there's quite a few big factors that change. First is going to be like how, if you make money or not. Then it's like what you spend your money on if you send it, how to reach you from a marketing perspective, and then there's kind of things like where you live and your financial influence. So those things all massively change basically every 2 years. Because if you imagine the way that you would market to a 16-year-old who's still living at home, who is part of Gen Z, 16-year-olds are Gen Z. So someone who's 16 living at home and goes to is in the junior year of high school, and they are all the money they make is the pocket money, and everything they spend it on is like snack food and like video games. And then they are only accessible through Snapchat and TikTok. The way that you market to that kid is wholly different to the way that you would market to someone who's 21, has just got their first apartment with 16 of their like friends from university, because you can't afford rent anymore. And then all the money they make is trying to like feed themselves and have a good time and pay rent. And they're in kind of higher education. They have no financial influence on their family because they don't live at home anymore. So they don't really have kind of a huge say in that anymore equally. And they're also equally only accessible through Instagram and WhatsApp. So the way that you market to 2 people who are in Gen Z, like inherently, is very, very different. And then actually you can take that a step further and say, well, the 18-year-old in the middle of those 2 is on his gap year. So all he cares about is spending money on holidays and like beers. In the UK, you can drink at 18. So I'm not encouraging anything illegal. So like that in itself is different. And then on the other end of that, you have like the 27, 28-year-olds who are still Gen Z, who are like looking to like buy houses or in like their 3rd, 4th, 5th year of a job, and they kind of have senior roles. So yeah, that was a bit of a ramble, but understanding which kind of how you want to reach Gen Z and which bit of Gen Z you're trying to reach is super important.
Right. Okay. So getting really clear on your market. Yeah. And knowing your market and being in relationship with your market. That's what I'm hearing is just so key, having those conversations and getting to know the Gen Zs and where they're at in their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So before I go to my final question, we do have a couple audience questions that we'll go through real quick. Let's see. Joseph asks, have either of you heard of any pushback from companies about investing in training and professional development for Gen Z staff who are less inclined to stay with a company for as long as workers from older generations? So sounds like Gosh, do we
Yeah,
invest in training for
I'm
these
just
young
reading that.
people
I'm
that are
reading
going
that
to,
through again. Give me a second.
yeah,
Oh, okay. No, I understand. I don't think the company's really pushing back. But I think that companies are just like strong. It's not really a pushback in an anger. When I think pushback, I think like angry. They don't want to do it. I think that they're more just like, how can we keep you? Like they're asking like how, and actually that relates back to those kind of 10 or so points that I made earlier about the obvious and less obvious way. It's about being heard and the content and the kind of quality and the kind of the communication style. So yeah, I don't think it's really a pushback in the sense, but Gen's people are really struggling and they want to understand how to keep Gen Z because you can't really push back and have another option because there isn't, because this is the young workforce and this is the people who are graduating from high schools and universities, and that's where they're like, those are the people you're going to hire. So I don't think it's a, yeah.
yeah, I would agree. And Joseph, I would just add that if people are having an issue about investing in and training young people, that is your succession plan, and it needs to be a collaborative, community-wide effort. It's not about prioritizing one group over the other. It's about rising all the tides. And you never know, even if a young professional leaves, you want them to leave on good terms and potentially come back and either be a client or consumer down the road. So I think that's really key. All right. Carl asks, what's your opinion on the issue of defining the generations? Is it by birth date and culture or where you are in your life cycle?
So I think whenever I speak about ages, I think there's two important elements to kind of understand. There's things that affect you because of when you were born, and there's things that affect you because of how old you are. So like the habits, the new things you do change based on those two scales. So Gen Z specifically, because of when we were born, had several things, like several factors. We weren't really old enough to remember 9/11, and especially not its significance, but we absolutely were for the 2008 financial crash. So and that made us very fiscally responsible and understanding of kind of the economy on a scale which millennials weren't. And then we equally had COVID at a time which was massive. I appreciate everyone had COVID, but being a 13-year-old at school in COVID and like the way that you communicated with your friends and the technologies that arose because of young people in COVID, wholly different to how COVID affected other people. Again, not for better or for worse, but it is different.
Yep.
And equally, we've also then grown up with kind of actually now several worldwide conflicts, which is not fantastic. And then also we've had a decade of social activism. We're the first generation to grow up with social media, and we've used it on a pretty dramatic level. So those are things that have affected Gen Z,
Yep.
Gen Z, and because of when we were born. And those are the things that will stick with us. And then Gen Alpha will have their own set of traits because of the things that they experience.
Right.
But Gen Z also happens to be 15 to 28 now, which happens to also be a very, very prolific time in any person's life. And the 15 to 28-year-olds, pardon me, are always going to be the change makers of the world because they want to be the zeitgeists of society. They want to make the change that they then grow up into. So that in itself is also like a huge factor you have to think about. That equally, I think people think that Gen Z is super, super woke and super like social activism-y and like kind of but actually I don't think that's the case. I think that every generation was like that. If you look back to like the suffragettes, the people who were really pushing the social change kind of 10, 30, 40 years ago, those were also the same age people. It's just we are able to we basically have a megaphone to every single young person's mouth, which can cross borders, and like one tweet can garner millions and millions of views and have a huge cultural impact. And it's just a different type of activism. It's not anything specific to Gen Z. And I think that when people really need to understand that the way that we're doing it is different, but actually everyone was doing the same thing when they were up until their kind of late 20s, where they want to be the change makers. They want to like, cheers.
Exactly.
So
all right.
That answers your question, Carl.
Yes, love it. Okay, so we have a few more questions and we only have 5 minutes. So we're going to do speed round. Okay. All right. Amazon recently announced 100% back in office. Can you attract Gen Z talent to an in-office world? What are your thoughts?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So Amazon just announced 100% back in office.
Okay.
How can companies attract Gen Z talent for an in-office world? Is it possible?
I think it's difficult, and I wish that I could give you a better answer. But I'm a really pro office person. I love working in the office. We are hybrid at Thread, but it's like it was set days, so everyone works from home Monday and Friday. So we always have office days Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and it's just super important. I think the atmosphere. There's something about being able to. The way that I see it is that like when you're out of office, one person can do one person's job. But when you're in office, I find that one person actually you kind of set each other off, and then all of a sudden, four people can achieve what six could have done out of office. So I wish
Yeah.
I could give you a better answer, but I'm actually super pro office, so I would
I don't think you're alone
still
with
work.
that.
I would still work at Amazon if they
Yeah,
have.
I don't think
Um,
you're alone with that. Our research shows that Gen Z actually like the face-to-face relationship building. There's some tech fatigue, so I think that aligns with
well,
what
yeah,
Jenk is
especially
saying.
after COVID, like, and this is one of the things that affected COVID us specifically was we got super super lonely during COVID because this was
Mhm.
like, especially if you're like a 13 to 16, like those are like
Oh yeah,
really defining years of your
yeah,
life, especially on a social level. So not being able to see your friends and like go out and like do like the dumb stuff that teenagers do. I say that like I'm not literally 19, but and I still do that dumb stuff all the time. But I
yeah.
think that not being able to do those things made you super lonely, and we have like a cripplingly like bad like loneliness epidemic in our generation, and that is kind of a consequence of COVID. But equally, we want to undo that now. So I think that there is like this wanting to get back into the world of work and like wanting to actually see each other and go out and
Hmm.
like not go out, but like leave the house and like see faces and actually interact on a genuine level. Yeah.
Fantastic. Um, one more, well, two more questions real quick. Many companies are moonwalking back, if you know what moonwalking is.
Oh, I
That
do.
might
I
be a
in fact do.
generational thing. All right, they're moonwalking back on their equity commitment. Thoughts on that? Like they're dropping the equity from DEI.
Oh, I couldn't tell you,
I
but
think
I
that's a
could.
huge mistake, don't you? I mean,
Yeah,
obviously we got to focus on inclusion, but equity is a piece of it.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I think so. But I admittedly don't feel super kind of informed to be able to answer properly. But I think that seems like an error.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
think
by the
so.
way, the moonwalk is completely intergenerational and historic.
Okay,
That
good.
will now or never die.
Good to know. Good to know. All right, let's go to our last question, round five. Woo! All right, so I'm curious to know what trends is Jenk Oz, the trend master, currently watching and advising others to prepare for?
Um, I think the big thing that we're seeing a lot of nowadays, and this is kind of related to, and the reason we're seeing it is because basically what is kind of the industries I work in is they've realized that if their company isn't doing well with Gen Z, they're being aged out, often forcibly by competitors who are younger, often forcibly by small businesses who are more sustainable. Uh, so the way that they're counteracting that is by trying to age in and age down, and they can do that in a couple different ways. You can either build, buy, or kind of both, like build and buy, and then kind of attract youth consumers. So build it would be like building like a sub brand, like a youthful sub brand. So like and actually it's a little American example for you, but like American Eagle had Airy, and then like Maiden Form had M, and stuff like that. And then you have other examples, which so that's build. Then you have buy. So you have like L'Oreal bought CeraVe recently. Uh, there's a couple other makeup examples, but they're not off the top of my head right now. And then you have like the build and buy, so both. When I think the best example is like Victoria's Secret built Pink and then bought Adore Me. So good example of how to do that. And all those examples are actually being quite successful, and they've managed to age back in because it's really hard as a company to, if you've been aged out, it's really hard to use the same name to age back in. So like, for example, like banks like Barclays and stuff like that. I don't know if you have it in the US, to be fair, but big traditional banks that what I would imagine my parents would use, are being aged out by like the Monzos, the Revoluts of the world. And again, I don't know if I have the in the US, but like challenger banks, like non brick and mortar, completely digital banks. So it's really hard for those bigger brands to age back in, because once you have like the court of general opinion thing, the court of public opinion thinks that you're kind of for old people, dare I say, then it's very hard to kind of become a Gen Z brand again. So you end up having to go through a different name by building or buying or both. 3Bs for you.
Ooh,
Yeah.
those are sage words and a great call to action for our audience to be thinking about next steps, how to stay relevant and engage your generation. Jenk, thank you for being
Thank
here
you so much.
today, for being part of
Thank you so
Trends
much for
Talk.
having me, Sarah.
Yeah, it was really
Thank
fun.
you, everyone. I
Yeah.
can see the chat, so thank you guys.
Yeah.
And amazing. Thank you for having me. All the best.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jenk. Thanks, everyone. Tune in next month.